Ads or in-app purchasing?
Ads, obviously.
Game Boy or Xbox?
Xbox.
Instagram or Snapchat?
Snapchat.
You're listening to ironSource Level Up with guest host Mishka Katkov.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Level Up, the podcast for people who love making, growing, and of course, playing mobile games. We're excited to have Mishka Katkov guest host our next few episodes.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Mishka is head of studio at Rovio and the founder of gaming blog Deconstructor of Fun. Today on the show, we have Ryan Davies, digital marketing manager at Kwalee, the hit hyper-casual gaming studio.
Hello, how's it going?
Mishka, I'll give the floor over to you.
Thank you for a very kind introduction once again. But Ryan, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so my background in some ways is short, which kind of makes it a little bit interesting. So I've only been in mobile, within mobile games specifically, for about a year and a half. Like Kwalee was essentially my first role. Started as a junior and kind of warmed into it pretty nicely, and now run the marketing team for the company. So yeah, it's a short background, like I said. Now basically I run the different elements of the marketing team in Kwalee.
So a year and a half and you're running a really successful game team.
Well, yeah,
or
I'm not running
game
the company.
No, game company is the UA team.
yeah, let's go with that.
That's pretty great. So how did you get into gaming? And more like, have you been a gamer before that?
Yeah, so I guess seemingly the vast majority of people in games is that the upside is that it all starts with a passion for games and still have a deathly girlfriend abusing passion for games. I'm sure she gets frustrated about things like me playing. So I still love console, PC and mobile across everything, and that original passion is then what grew into me just getting in the industry and finding my own kind of place in it.
So how come you went to user acquisition instead of design, which is more traditional?
I guess the longer story is that I have a university background in journalism, so writing and that kind of stuff is where I was originally leaning. The other side of the coin is marketing, really, and there's better opportunities in that area in many ways, financially and pretty much everything else. So that's the direction that I went in, and in some ways journalism and marketing are very similar. What I said about them being other sides of the same coin is so true, that marketing and journalism, they're still talking about and promoting and experiencing other people's creations. I think that's why I kind of lean towards it, and what I enjoy about it is pushing other people's great ideas and concepts and showing them to the world, and that's still what's fun about it, really.
It's awesome.
That was a bit too much of a philosophical
No,
answer.
that was very different approach to user acquisition, because normally you would have people who are more from an analytical background.
Yeah, right.
And journalism is definitely a different background to do performance marketing.
Exactly. Sometimes I think that the data heavy side is obviously so important and so relevant, especially as my job has evolved and changed, but having that kind of fundamental understanding of players and users is still quite helpful to kind of make it all a bit more real and not just like numbers on a screen. I think that helps, having that kind of background.
For sure.
Understanding.
And probably helps it with leading a team, right?
That too, yeah, definitely.
How big is the team?
So the company as a whole is about 30 people, and then marketing is basically 3-4, you could say. It's small within that, but obviously an important part.
Super important. So let's talk more about Kwalee. First of all, where did that name come from?
Yeah, our company was founded by David Darling, who those in the console area will probably recognize the name. He's one of the co-founders of Codemasters, and basically the name comes from his father's boat, which was in Australia. So it's kind of like an Aboriginal background kind of name. So it's kind of a weird one. People don't usually assume that we're from the UK based on the name.
Yes.
It certainly doesn't sound like
Oh,
it.
how long has Kwalee been?
So the company actually has been running since 2011, so 7 years. A lot of it was improvement and growth and changing and learning how to adapt to the mobile market. And I think like in the last year and a half, it's kind of been a big change for us in growth towards hyper casual, and that's something where we found our niche and something that we found that works.
And now you only do hyper casual.
Yeah, so the funny thing is that really a year and a half ago when we started this, hyper casual wasn't defined as a thing. Mad in a way that really it wasn't defined even maybe 6 months ago. That was about when I first started hearing it. So we really started our journey on hyper casual before it was a thing, which makes sense because that partially explains why we're now one of the bigger players in the area. Now basically our whole business is modeled and geared towards making hyper casual games, so it's definitely a focus, but at the same time there's certainly an interest of how that can evolve, and I think we've definitely noticed that to a degree. We are making hyper casual games, but at the same time we're definitely starting to implement elements from other verticals and other types of games, kind of evolving the genre a bit. So idle games and things like that is a good example. So as much as we are hyper casual, we're definitely learning from and evolving.
That's awesome. So you have about 10 games in your portfolio right now?
Yeah, about that total. Say like 3 have been big hits for us that have gone really well, like 5 or 6 that have been strong. I guess the thing with hyper casual is that you got to try a lot and you got to give it a go and don't be afraid to fail. That is very much the mentality, and it's the mentality that we knew we need at the beginning, and we've stuck through the whole time. Sometimes it can be brutal when you have cherished, loved ideas, and I'm sure like every mobile game developer and publisher kind of goes through that. To be fair, I look at companies like Rovio or Supercell or something who soft launch a game for a couple years and then ditch it. Okay, that probably does hurt a bit more. I could see that. Whereas at least for us, it's like a game maybe we spent a few weeks on, and even that hurts.
Yeah.
When it's something you really love. So I can't even imagine for the big games. That sounds terrifying.
To make them for a long time and see them fail in soft launch?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it
sounds
is.
brutal.
It is.
I wouldn't want to do that.
It's wasted years only. It's okay.
Yeah, but I guess you get learning from it, and in the same way for us, failing is so critical.
Yeah.
It's such a cliche, but I think it's always so true. You know, that's a really important part of the process, and I think it's very true for hyper casual because you're dealing with such a fast rate of content and things coming out that you got to fail to learn.
So let's talk about failures and learnings then. On average, like how many games are you releasing to soft launch and how many of them are working? Like what is your hit to miss ratio? Because naturally, when we're talking about other type of games, the development times are between a year and two.
Yep.
You don't want to bail on them right away in the soft launch when the first metrics come in. Sometimes you need to, but
might be tempted to.
Yeah, but often you're trying to make it happen. The development times are between 2 to 4 weeks for a game. Much easier to bail.
Yeah, so because everything we produce is internally developed within our team rather than publishing external games, I think that might actually be a little less than some of the other hyper-casual guys. But I think also it gives us a chance to curate, but also testing that volume gives us great visibility of what's working, what's not working within the industry.
So regarding that, you have games that are unique in terms of how they look and how they play. There's the, I'm really bad with names. There's the fishing game.
Yeah, Go Fish.
Go Fish. I should have remembered that.
It wasn't too complicated, I guess.
Yeah, but there's so many of the similar type of names.
I can't blame you.
And then there's Ball Blast, right?
Yeah, Ball Blast, Plank and Looper and
Yeah.
other 10s, Spills.
So they're all kind of different. And how does the user acquisition varies between those type of different games?
The key thing that varies is really how things play out. You know, hyper casual can be a little bit more difficult to predict, and sometimes you've just got to be highly reactionary. You know, the good thing about doing user acquisition for hyper casual is that you can see results very quickly, and you know very quickly whether something's working or not, and that means you can adapt very quickly. And I know that IAP focused games are becoming seemingly better and better at doing a similar thing of kind of reacting quickly or trying to. But, you know, we don't aim to get our money back in like 9 months or 12 months or whatever. That makes me want to throw up. So yeah, we market our games differently because market conditions can be so volatile and so changing that you really have to be like quick on your feet basically and try to adapt as fast as possible. So as much as it is about the game and like what type of game it is and how that adapts your creative and things like that, it is just as much about the marketplace and how you react to it.
So about the volumes, like what kind of volumes are we talking about on a monthly basis?
I find it's an interesting question because I never think of things in monthly ways. In hyper-casual land, it's too easy to think about things in daily terms.
Yeah. Well,
because
let's talk daily
everything
then.
changes like
or hourly.
So quickly. Yeah, hourly. So that's like, it's all I ever like to think of numbers. But I guess the thing is, the numbers basically are massive, like 500,000 installs a day, like leaning towards that kind of thing. Massive numbers, definitely. And in key territories, I think there's a slight misconception that hyper-casual is just spreading in loads of like small country or like lots of tier 3s and things like that. But obviously it's massively dominant in tier 1, and
of course
that is certainly where we focus.
Yeah, because that's where the ad revenue is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the good thing about hyper-casual as well is that I think for some people, say APAC is a hard market to enter, but it's much easier for hyper-casual because there's a lot less localization, there's a lot less thought and effort that has to go into it. So that makes it easier to kind of spread your wings and kind of increase your volumes, basically.
Oh, got it. And the CPIs are naturally very low.
Yeah.
But the ad revenue is also probably pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, people keep talking about what hyper-casual actually is, which is like a really fair question that I think maybe even us and other hyper-casual guys haven't even totally been able to define completely yet. Like, I find it's more defined at the moment by the companies who are doing it, but basically linking it to the CPI and LTV kind of element. One thing I would almost say is that anything below $1 acquisition or below $1 LTV is getting towards hyper-casual territory. Me being only a year and a half experience, in some ways hyper-casual is like everything I've known. But yeah, I think, you know, people were surprised. People didn't think that ad revenue could be a sustainable way of running games because of those low LTVs that are, compared to an IAP game, are definitely still true. But obviously it's just that highly effective marketing and kind of gearing your games towards being good for marketing.
And the low CPI, does it come from just the extreme accessibility of the game?
Yeah, I think that is basically it. It's such a creative and IPM game. I think ironSource would be happy to say IPM. It installs per 1,000 impressions. It's how many people are going to install based on the creative they're seeing. And I think that really is just defined by, you can gear the creative how you want. We can experiment with different creatives, and we sure as hell do. But it's about how easily people can understand the game when they first see it. Voodoo have said it before, and it's true, is that something snackable, understandable enough, YouTubeable, seeing yourself playing it, understanding it, relating to it, and that is the crux of what makes it work from a marketing perspective, I think.
Yeah, and there's sometimes a misconception in the sense that most of the traffic is organic, or that it's coming in from others, but no, it's user acquisition.
Yep.
Just like another.
It's definitely the grunt, and like in some ways the hyper-casual has kind of evolved. I mean, the point where it started being defined as this is hyper-casual was the point where people started to rely on really strong user acquisition and like high spend and just really pumping in users. But also organics is also an important part. There's obviously a benefit to being up at the top of the chart, so that means that you're also kind of working for organics and K-factor, and that's an important part of the puzzle as well.
So what are the sort of like important user acquisition metrics when understanding these hyper-casual or arcade games?
I guess what I said, which is IPM. So much of what we do is defined by the quality of the creative and the effectiveness of the creative right at the beginning. And, you know, we can adapt it how we want, but the game kind of defines that quality. Obviously, we behave like a normal UA department in that we look at our LTVs and our CPIs and our ROAS and everything else. But really, that kind of like creative effectiveness is the most important element. And it's definitely what we focus on. And I know every other hyper-casual focuses on, it's like everyone probably focuses on creative effectiveness, but maybe it's even more at the forefront, or like the first step for hyper-casual.
Yeah, understand. How about cross-promotion? I mean, playing your game, you didn't have as prominent cross-promotion space. Do you use the ad inventory for your own games? Or?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of interesting because we at Kwalee maybe don't implement it as much as some others. Like basically we in the game have ambient ads where we cross-promote our games. So that would be like on the menu screens and things like that, or like within the game, it would be like a small square that with a video playing, and that's kind of encouraging people to play. So that provides like a good throughput for cross-promotion and definitely gives us stuff that we're pretty happy with. That doesn't diminish returns in certain games, and obviously we kind of set it up so that we're pushing into the main games that we want to be focusing on. We do a little bit here and there, so we recently started running ironSource cross promotion, but that's relatively small in comparison to like our standard UA behavior. Basically because of ketchup, I think that there's the concept that cross promotion is like a massive part of the puzzle for loads of hyper casuals, but I don't think that's necessarily true in every case, and even in the most extreme case being Voodoo, I think that even those guys are still focusing more on user acquisition,
of course,
the grunt and the power that you get from that, whereas cross promo can be more of just like a bonus, you know, so which is sort of how we look at it at the moment. Okay, that doesn't mean it won't change.
Got it. So what you're not doing is, because sometimes, like especially when we're talking about casual game developers or puzzle games or so forth that have many similar type of games, they would bundle those kind of together to one specific LTV.
Right.
That is the portfolio LTV. So that allows you to go after higher CPIs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, we definitely don't do that right now. And like what I think is sometimes interesting about hyper casual is that the models can be very simple, and just the methods behind the marketing can be very, very simple. And there was a time where I thought that because of that I was doing it wrong or not well enough, and was kind of like embarrassed about like how simple techniques were and stuff. You know, it's just like, what's the CPI, what's the LTV, can we acquire at that level? Yeah. But the more and more kind of went on, the more I realized that really it's a method that just works very well for this vertical. I mean, that doesn't mean that there aren't new methods coming. You know, there's always room for things to improve as we start to learn more about the users that we have in our games and how we're making money through ads.
That's definitely is different because of the fact that because your payback times are so short, you can be much more reactive. But when they're longer and the investments are much larger, then you're investing more time in analyzing and trying to grow your UA budget with whatever new formulas you can find.
I could definitely see how different it could be.
So can you talk about what you discovered by using ironSource as an ad revenue tool?
So over the past few months in particular, ironSource has really adapted to the ad monetization landscape and to the hyper casual landscape, definitely in some ways more than most other companies I've seen, and that basically means producing or creating tech that deals with the difficulties that we face. You know, like what I was talking about in terms of our methods being somewhat simplistic is kind of helping us evolve those and develop those so they're a bit less simplistic. For instance, having access to user level ad revenue data, stuff like that is crucial, because for IAP games you totally become accustomed to and accept the fact that you have access to exactly how much money a user is making making for you. You know, they're buying something, they're making a purchase. It's really easy to track, or at least it is after years of development and tech development. Whereas obviously for ad revenue games, that's a much more complicated beast. The methods that we've used in the past and that a lot of people still use are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It's like how many impressions are people getting, therefore this is how much revenue they're driving you. That's not realistic. That's not how revenue works. So, you know, like ironSource basically bringing out tools that let us see user level ROAS data. So actual numbers on CPMs that individual people are bringing us and contributing to our revenue. That stuff's very important.
So I have to ask about this user level ad revenue data. I'm from the studio side, so this is a different type of metric that I have never seen before, to be honest.
Yep.
What does it mean? I understand that it's a challenge measuring that user level ad revenue data.
Yeah. So rather than previously just knowing the impressions that your users are seeing and then sort of semi-randomly assigning revenue to them based on those impressions, like I said, that's not really how revenue is actually distributed. Like people are of different quality in the same way of, you know, like whales, there's ad whales as well. Although that's like a long, that's another long topic that gets discussed a lot and people never have a totally great solution and answer to what it actually means. So it's kind of the beginning, or even like a very, very strong step towards better understanding things like ad whales, or like in the same way an IAP developer or publisher will look at which sources are bringing me better quality users, which ones are driving me my whales and things. We can now start to drill down at a much better level and look at the source level and say which ones are driving us the better quality users, which, you know, for many developers and publishers, that's probably like an obvious thing. But for us, you know, only semi-recently that become like a much easier thing and a much more reliable thing, because before we could do that, you know, you could drill down, but how reliable it was is touchy at best, hence why you lean towards the more simplistic methods. But now it's just like so much better reliable data. So the key for me now that data is starting to be shared and starting to have access is implementing it completely and effectively with our tools and the methods that we actually use. That's kind of the next step, really.
So let's talk about monetization, because that's, you know, that's the end of all, and especially the monetization loop between UA and monetization. So the first question is, there's kind of two parts here that I'm interested in. The first one is like, do you run live operations? Is there like a team that is running on it, or do you just complete the game and it's basically in the hands of ad monetization and UA?
No, so we do run live ops in a real sense. We try to meet every morning and it doesn't always pan out, but we do run live ops. And I think that in our case, there's a few examples of hyper casual game devs who do come back to their titles and keep pushing them and working on them and improving them. And we're kind of in that category. A good example is our game Plank. We released that like 4 months ago, but then a few weeks ago we launched an augmented reality mode within Plank. And that got featured really nicely by Apple. So it's like, you know, how can we continue to evolve our games? You know, we're not shy for doing that, because I think that other guys out there, and including like Legendary, a good example of guys who can make some changes to their games and re-push it. So we're definitely not afraid of doing that. And, you know, it's definitely not a case of just releasing a game, forgetting about it from the dev side. I mean, at the very least, our developers are incredibly interested to see how it performs and to see how it does. People like to be involved and like to understand what's happening. It means that people aren't just like pushing a game out and then just leaving it with marketing and hoping for the best. Definitely has more of a group effort feel, for sure.
When you give things another push, is it from a design perspective, keeping it hyper casual, or would you say, okay, now we feel we can add an IAP element to it?
Good question. I guess it's a variety of things, but I think that it's driven by developers and designers' constant desire and need to improve and having ideas and kind of wanting to implement those into the game and seeing the potential for that to increase revenues and increase engagement. And I think that in some ways it's just as much driven by that desire by the developers to want to actually improve the games and to kind of find new ways to monetize and improve it. And so it starts with them, and then it's something that we are looking for. Is it a game that we can kind of repush? And then it evolves into like a fully formed idea. So it often starts at grassroots development level.
So with the monetization loop, when do you think about the monetization or closing of the user acquisition / monetization?
When do we think about it?
All the time.
Almost right from the beginning. I think that definitely we start to kind of realize more and more better methods for monetizing, better ways to be displaying ads, to be using ads, and at the same time how to kind of get the most out of different types of games. You know, you kind of mentioned earlier about a hyper casual portfolio can be incredibly varied and across, you know, from fishing to puzzly music games and things like that. It requires different ways to think about your monetization with different ways to implement ads. So yeah, we're thinking about it very early from a design side, and then that kind of cross references then to us actually running the games and keeping the monetization strong. There's a hell of a lot that goes into that outside of just game development, but yeah, it is crucial and very early part of the process for us.
So automation has changed the UI a lot. So how does it affected your work?
So ironSource at the moment is our first real proper foray into automation, and it's something that we are planning on expanding pretty rapidly in our business. With ironSource being the specific example, the tool now on ironSource is that you can just set a ROAS target and let the system automatically bid and aim for that ROAS target, which so far for us has worked brilliantly. It's the kind of thing now of just wanting to use it for everything, because like I said, we're 3 people marketing team, or less 3 or 4, and that's including like creative as well, and like non-UA people. And so it becomes quite good and helpful to have like an automated system that runs itself and it wins out in a lot of cases. And that's basically the crux of a system, why it works so well. The logic behind it is not new or surprising, you know, it's what I do day to day as a UA manager. So it's just kind of putting that to practice, but just making the process easier and letting us kind of hands off and kind of just see it from afar. It has new challenges as well, you know, setting those ROAS targets isn't always easy. And like I said, we have to be super adaptable. So in some ways, we still have to be looking and changing things quickly. But if changing one number equals changing like 1,000 campaigns at once, then that's a much easier process for us.
So that leaves more time for creative soft launches, right?
I guess creative soft launch is definitely something that we kind of picked up through ironSource. It's a soft launch, but from marketing side, you're focusing on how the creative performs and finding the best performing ads, and having lots of content ready and testing it and only going live with like the best performing content, which again is not a new thing.
So you're testing them in specific market, or the game is out globally already at that point?
Yeah, usually it's in specific markets. Like early on, when we go big, we go global then. But usually in a similar way to an IP game, it's the usual kind of tier 1s or tier 3s, depending on what you're testing. It's a similar deal for us, basically, yeah.
Perfect. I learned a ton.
What's your personal favourite hyper-casual game?
Good question. Well, my favourite is Looper. Is it unfair to just pick one of your own games? But it's definitely true. I guess I probably would have got a slap if I'd gone back to the office and said like a voodoo game. Yeah. But basically, Looper for me is my favourite, because for me it's an incredibly inventive design. You know, definitely recommend go play it, because it's kind of a really nice combination of playing an old school rhythm game mixed with music elements. And hyper casual can be a lot of games very similar and work on trends and things like that, but I think that in particular is a game that straight away I was just like, that's gonna work. Like, I could see the adverts we were gonna make already. So that's definitely my favorite one. Yeah.
Okay, I'll download it once we're back in
Looper.
Wi-Fi range.
Cool. Good. All right, that's at least 1 organic for the day. So.
Two.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, doing my job.
Saving you money.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Mishka. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been really, really fun.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Hope to see you all next episode. Kwalee.
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 You're like Kwalee, right?
Kwalee.
Is it? I don't know.